fallen warriors. I want to bring in CNN's Caitlin Collins from the White House. Caitlin.
Yeah, Jake, obviously that moment in the press conference today is just part of the many questions that this White House has been facing about what's next in Iran, what the United States wants to see next when it comes to leadership there, and obviously what the plan is for current service members that are in the forces in terms of what that's going to look like with the campaign. As they say, it's only accelerating, whether or not there'll be boots on the ground. But this premise of the question, given what the secretary said this morning, which was pretty blunt, Jake, and also, I should note, seemed to be coming from his prepared remarks. It wasn't a comment that Hegseth seemed to make off the cuff to the reporters who were gathered there at the Pentagon this morning, often one of the best press corps in town that asked the most questions about what exactly is happening here. And so I wanted to follow up with the White House on that, given, obviously, when the president goes and attends the dignified transfer of those 6 fallen service members, CNN and other media outlets will carry it, as we always do. It's an incredibly somber and solemn ceremony, typically where their families are present there in these moments. And so I asked the press secretary if that was a viewpoint that the White House agreed with in terms of what the coverage of these deaths should look like. Here's more of what Caroline Leavitt said to me.
I just told you that the President of the United States will be attending their dignified transfer. So please,
That's not making the president look bad. That's showcasing that.
We expect you to cover that as you should. We expect you to cover that as you should, Caitlin. But you and your network know that you take every single thing this administration says and tries to use it to make the president look bad. That is an objectable fact.
I don't think covering troop deaths is trying to make
if you're trying to argue right now that CNN's overwhelming coverage is not negative of President Donald Trump, I think the American people would tend to agree.
Jake, I think it obviously goes without saying, as you just noted there, that covering the deaths of these service members has nothing to do with President Trump himself personally, just as it didn't with other presidents. I mean, they are the commander-in-chief. There are real questions about what's happening in Iran and what the United States is planning to do. But anytime a service member dies, we cover it, and we did so when it was President Biden at the Abbey Gate. I was standing here on the North Lawn when that happened, and I remember that. And also in President Trump's first term. And so it's just a fact of covering the Pentagon, covering Washington, and obviously covering the ultimate sacrifice that these U.S. service members have made here.
It really is the height of solipsism and narcissism to think that our coverage of fallen warriors has anything to do with how we cover a president. I'm just utterly shocked that Hegseth and now Caroline Leavitt are saying it. I don't even really know what to say. It's so offensive. I don't care what they think about us. It's so offensive to the families who deserve coverage. There's one thing that you can say about the news media, or just this country. We don't pay enough attention as a nation to fallen veterans. There should be more coverage. Whoever's in the building behind you. Caitlin Collins at the White House, thank you so much. Don't miss Caitlin on her show. The Source with Caitlin Collins. Her guests tonight include former Vice President Mike Pence. That's tonight at 9 Eastern, only on CNN. We're going to have much more on our breaking news out of the Middle East ahead, but we're also following breaking news on Capitol Hill tonight. A bipartisan group of House lawmakers have just voted, shockingly, to subpoena the U.S. Attorney General, Pam Bondi. This is part of their Epstein investigation. That's next.
Kara Swisher Wants to Live Forever. Coming soon on CNN.
Are you a fiduciary? Well, sure. What about you? Yes.
As you may know, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution in 1973 in response to the Vietnam War. It would allow any one member of the House or the Senate to force a vote to withdraw U.S. forces from a conflict or to block strikes. Presidents for years have held that War Powers Act is unconstitutional. When it comes to the U.S. conflict in Iran, this legislation always faced long odds because even if it passed both chambers of Congress, there is not enough support without question to override a presidential veto. And to be perfectly frank, many members of Congress don't like voting on such matters because such votes force them to take a position at a specific moment in time that they can never erase. Never erase. Ask former Senator Hillary Clinton how she feels about her Iraq authorization vote. So, the Trump administration is carrying on with this military campaign while the timeline and desired outcome remain unclear as of now. The U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said earlier today it's, quote, very early in its military operations against Tehran, the Pentagon. And today, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked what success looks like in Iran.
We've hit all of these
targets. What can Americans expect the goal to be moving forward now that the U.S. has accomplished all of this? What is victory, given we've even taken out Iran's supreme leader? That was an explicit goal. Again, victory will be determined by the commander-in-chief once the goals and the objectives that we have repeatedly laid out are fully realized.
Leavitt was also pressed on the fact that the U.S. did not seem to have a plan to safely evacuate all of the American citizens in the 14 Middle Eastern countries notified by the State Department until yesterday, day 3 of the war.
There was many signs put out by the State Department, and I wish that everyone in this room would report on them. The Secretary of State issued level 4 travel advisories dating back to January for many of these countries in the region.
The White House seeming to blame the news media, not the most powerful government on earth, for leaving its citizens stranded in a war zone. In any case, the only countries that had the highest travel advisory before the war began were Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon. Those are clearly not the only countries that now find themselves on the wrong end of Iranian missiles. Plus, the travel advisory ahead of a potential attack is not the same thing as having a plan ready to get thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Americans out after the attack. But, be that as it may, let's get right to CNN's Manu Raju on Capitol Hill. Manu, ahead of the end of the War Powers Resolution vote, you have been talking to many lawmakers about why they're supporting the military action in Iran. What are they saying?
Yeah, Republicans in particular, because they have the votes. If they wanted to vote to authorize this military action or vote for this war powers resolution, they could do that. But we're seeing Republican after Republican line up against it, including in this measure that is now on the Senate floor and is on track to fail. The vote right now, 47 to 52. It would require a simple majority for approval. And just 2 members have broken ranks with their respective parties. Rand Paul of Kentucky voting with Democrats. He frequently breaks on foreign policy issues. John Fetterman was voting with Republicans. He's been more hawkish on some foreign policy issues. But a Republican after Republican are telling me they don't need to vote for this war powers resolution, which will require Congress, the president, to get consent from Congress to continue with the military operations of Iran, or a separate authorization for use of military force, what George W. Bush asked for in the Iraq War and Afghanistan War. They say this situation is different. Why shouldn't Congress have to vote to authorize it?
I just don't think that's within constitutional parameters.
Why not have Congress act?
This is a totally different, both of those operations were in response in the wake of 9/11. They were new operations. We've been in consistent conflict with Iran for 46 years.
But in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were AUMFs authorizing the use of force.
There was an entirely different set of mission that I think has absolutely no relevance in looking at this operation.
Why not just vote to authorize this war?
Well, I think the president has the authority.
Would you consider it a war?
It's a significant military operation.
And, of course, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has referred to this as a war, as President Trump has himself. And the Congress, as you know, Jake, under the Constitution has the explicit authority to declare war. But very clearly here, Republicans don't see the need of trying to rein in President Trump in any which way, even though there are still many, many questions about how long this will go on for, what additional resources will be needed, and if it continues to drag on, will the president be forced to come back to Capitol Hill? But one thing the lawmakers are bracing for, Jake, is an additional
people. We are here 24/7, our highest priority being the safety and security of the American people.
How concerned, Tommy, is the State Department about possible Iranian retaliation against U.S. citizens abroad, including here in the United States?
Well, the president has spoken to this. We've seen updated travel guidance in terms of the security situation we have seen. And the security challenges are part of what we are overcoming in order to help the American people. The secretary talking about the airport being hit, the secretary talking about certain airspace closures. We are constantly identifying those additional options to help the Americans who need it. That's why we encourage Americans to go to step.state.gov, register for those security alerts, check the embassy website, as well as call. Please call. I've said it before. I'll say it again because of how important it is in order for us to know if you need that assistance and then be able to proactively reach out with those charter flights, those charter buses, those commercial options when they become available.
I mentioned yesterday, Tommy, that the British government has been activating military personnel, military aircraft to go into some of these countries, to land at various military bases and evacuate their citizens. But so far, the U.S. government, I haven't seen any evidence that you have authorized the U.S. military to deploy cargo planes, other huge aircraft, for example, to Israel or Kuwait or Saudi Arabia to evacuate U.S. citizens. Even if the airspace is closed, there are military air bases where they could land, and you could inform U.S. citizens, go to these bases, and you'll get on a military plane and come back to the United States. Why hasn't that happened?
Well, what I can say is that we've seen the assisted departure of hundreds of Americans from Israel, for example. Those numbers are continuing to grow. The Secretary talking about how we are looking at options, including military flights. I'm not going to get into operational details or preview what those might be for the security concerns that are evident in this. But rest assured, when you call, we will proactively reach out. That's also why that advice is so important. Be ready to go, be ready to move when able so that we can overcome the security challenges. But we are looking at every single option. We've seen Americans that have been assisted departure. We've seen the 17,000 Americans that have left the Middle East and returned to the United States since this began. And we also see that tailored travel guidance to Americans that call and register. So please call. We're looking at every single option to help the American people. This process has begun and it will continue to happen as long as Americans need assistance.
But in Israel, for example, there are Americans who are escaping Israel and getting out of Israel. But the only way they're doing that is to get in a car and drive to Egypt, for example, through Sinai and go to Sharm el-Sheikh or someplace else. There are no flights that they can get out. They got to